here we are. We're on the verge of June 1st. And so all the heavy lifting's been done on not just the Niner roster construction, really almost every roster around the league. And yet, if you look around at the remaining free agents, there's several good players that are still out there. At safety, Justin Simmons, Quandre Diggs, Micah Hyde, Jamal Adams, Eddie Jackson. Those guys are all still available. The Niners probably have a need there. Edge rusher-wise, Carl Lawson, Emmanuel Ogbah, Tyus Bowser, Yannick Ngakoue, Calais Campbell. They're all still out there available. And if you were looking for help at offensive tackle, DJ Humphreys, Charles Leno, David Bakhtiari, Donovan Smith, Dwayne Brown, they're still out there. They're looking for a tight end. The Niners, Mercedes Lewis, a great blocking tight end. There's Logan Thomas, Blake Bell, the former Niner, the Belldozer, Jimmy Graham. There's good wide receivers, Hunter Renfrow, Sterling Shepard, Michael Thomas, Jamal Agnew, Russell Gage. I'm just kind of wondering, do you think that the 49ers will make any addition roster-wise of significance between now and camp? And if so, who would you go for?
There's some good players on that list. Obviously, some are a lot better than others. You look at a player like Justin Simmons. He's entering his age 31 season. He's a 4-time All-Pro. He has played really well under some complex defenses, starred under Vic Fangio. He leads the NFL in interceptions since coming into the league in 2016. The Niners, according to Mike Silver, looked into him earlier in free agency. And that's that type of center field ball hawking safety who, on top of the stellar play, and I don't think there are any signs of decline, he's also a great leader and a perennial team captain with the Denver Broncos. That's a player that I think would really move the needle. And you're not going to trot out a lot of 3 safety sets at the NFL level, but you can find ways to utilize Justin Simmons, Jair Brown, and Talanoa Hufanga. And Hufanga can kind of be that hybrid linebacker. He's a little bit too slow to be in the slot, but you can still find a way to get him on the field. So Justin Simmons would be intriguing to me. And he would be a massive upgrade that makes your defense a lot better right now. If you want to go with more of that Deshaun Gibson type, do you go after Eddie Jackson, who is a long way away from being the first team All-Pro that he was in 2018 and has had a couple of injuries the last couple of years, but has played decent football over the last couple of years. And if it weren't for those injuries, he was starting to find his stride a little bit. Quandre Diggs is a player who's really respected. I think at that safety position, you could use some more depth in the way of how you brought in Deshaun Gibson a couple of years ago, and he ended up playing really, really well for you. My favorite edge rusher of that crew is probably Emmanuel Ogbah. Yannick Ngakoue is a player who, up until last year when he got hurt, every year that he had been in the NFL, going all the way back to 2016 when he was a rookie, he had been able to rack up at least 8 sacks. Now, this is a player who's bad against the run, but he can get after the quarterback. Are you confident in your Turgros Matos and Drake Jackson as backups behind Leonard Floyd and Nick Bosa? If you're not, maybe you look to get a depth piece there. Outside of that, I think San Francisco is pretty set at every other position. Linebacker, they're good. I want to see what D. Winters and Jalen Graham can do. At defensive tackle, maybe you could use some depth there, but I think they like Evan Anderson, and
he looked good, by the way.
What you see from Evan Anderson?
I love the way he moved around. I didn't realize he was number 60. And then I watched what I had kind of taped from minicamp, and man, just he is moving so much better at 315 pounds than when you watched his film when he was closer to 350. Yeah. And he's still maintaining great strength. So I don't know. He's going to be he'll be fun to watch this summer.
And they gave him $260,000 in guaranteed money, which is pretty much practice squad money. So that's a player out of FAU to watch. I don't know if you need to make a move there, and hopefully Kalia Davis can stay healthy and make a little bit of a leap. You also have Jordan Elliott as a backup. And then along the offensive line, there just are not good options left in free agency. So I think what you're looking at, the aforementioned players at safety, maybe edge rusher. But other than that, I think San Francisco is pretty set with a roster that still has the premium talent from last year, has a little bit more depth in some spots this year, and is still top to bottom, one of the best rosters in the NFL.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned, to be honest, about Drake Jackson and Robert Beal and trying to lean on those guys. So it's like if you could get a Carl Lawson or an Ogba or somebody like a veteran to add to their mix, I think that would be good. One of the stories of the week is that Javon Hargrave believes that his conditioning can improve in 2024. And I've been eager to talk to you about him all week because you saw him in Philly and saw him in Pittsburgh and now got a chance to see him up close with the Niners this last year. I would kind of contend that even though, man, that was a celebrated signing as, wow, look, can you wait? We can't wait until we can see Bosa and Hargrave on the same line. How will O-lines be able to block these guys? And you can't double everybody and blah, 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 blah. And then Hargrave comes in, and to pay for his exorbitant contract, they had to cut loose a bunch of guys, including Samson Ebukam and Emmanuel Mosley and Jimmy Ward and
Charles Omenihu
and Aziz Al-Shair and the gigantic nose guard they lost out on as well. Why is his name escaping me right now? But Hassan Ridgeway.
Yeah.
A bunch of guys. I mean, they lost, and all of those guys were good against the run. And then suddenly this year, they weren't very good against the run. My contention would be if you could just reverse that last off season, not sign Hargrave and just re-sign, let's say 4 or 5 of your top run defenders that you kissed off because to give that money to Hargrave, I think the Niners win the Super Bowl. I think that move was a headline grabber, and everybody was like, yeah, it was awesome. I think that might be the reason they didn't win. I was very unimpressed with Hargrave. What do you think, though, Chase? Because you saw Hargrave in Philly. Was Hargrave in Philly in a lot better shape than Hargrave in San Francisco in your mind?
Yeah. This signing kind of came out of nowhere. And going into free agency in 2023, I had him listed as a free agent candidate, a free agent target for San Francisco, just because, I had the same thought of Hargrave, Bosa. You get better at defensive tackle. You team them up alongside Eric Armstead, and you can really try to dominate the interior of the line, take some double teams naturally away from Nick Bosa. It was a classic case of him in his 29-year-old season with Philadelphia, going to the Super Bowl, having a career year, double-digit sacks for the first time. He had 11. And on top of that, 10 TFLs and 16 quarterback hits, and he cashed in. The concern that I did have, though, was that the Niners needed to get a little bit better against the run, and Javon Hargrave was not going to help you against the run at all. He's historically been a pass rushing defensive tackle, and he has been a bad player at defensive tackle in trying to stop the run. And that's what happened last year for San Francisco. Like, in a down year, he actually played not terribly from a pass rushing standpoint. He still had 7 sacks. He still had 52 total pressures and 38 hurries. So if he's in better shape, and if he goes back to the 2022 form, that's of course great. But against the run, he was awful. He had a run defense grade of 49. His overall grade was 73.9. His pass rush grade last year was 87.2. Now, it was a little bit Jekyll and Hyde, where I think against the Giants, he had that really good game. And then for a while, he didn't do anything. So consistency and being better against the run is something that he needs to improve upon. Oddly enough, I thought that he was actually pretty good against the run in the Super Bowl. But when you pay a player that much money, you're totally right. You lose out on some other depth pieces, and you lost out on depth pieces along the defensive line specifically who helped you against the run. And in turn, that defensive line once again kind of wore down a little bit toward the end of last year. The age concerns me, but if he can be in better shape, because he's a big dude who, as Mike Mayock would say, has a big bubble butt. If he can slim up a little bit, I think that hopefully he can have a rebound season, because this is what the Niners need, is for him to play better.
No question. He's got to play like the guy they're paying him to be. Otherwise, it's like that's a terrible trade-off. I hate trading 5 for 1 anyway, ever, whether it be draft picks or veterans. And they kind of essentially, even though it was a free agent signing, it was almost like a trade. And I think they got the worst end of it, at least to this point. What do you think as far as special teams? You saw Brian Schneider talking about the new return rules. What struck me was just how new this is to him and how like everything seems very undecided. Like, hey, we just have to see how this goes. And my question to him was like, Brian, you got every kind of return man known to man in this camp. And I'm like, what's the depth chart? Who's atop the depth chart here? What are we looking for? And he wouldn't answer the depth chart part. And I don't even know if they have one right now, but he did agree that they've got every kind of return guy. They got Trent Taylor, who's very sure-handed. They've got Danny Gray, who's tiny but fast. They've got Isaac Guerrero, who's a running back with receiving skills. They've got Juice. They've got Debo. They've got Ayuk. They've got,
Ricky
Pearsall. They've got, smallish guys, bigger guys. They could go with guys who are very sure-handed. What do you think? I mean, do you think that this is, if you had to guess, do you think that the smart teams in the league go for the sure-handed Trent Taylor, don't fumble the ball approach and just don't lose the game on special teams? Or do you think teams get super aggressive and are going for the, trying to win the game on special teams as there's this kind of adjustment period where everybody kind of figures out, risk reward and what their game plan is going to be? Because it's pretty clear listening to Schneider that the Niners game plan is still in the formulating stages.
This is so interesting because when the news came out of the new kickoff, so many people were against it, saying the kickoff is dead. And I'm saying, well, hold on. The kickoff was dead. I think this brings it alive again because of a couple of reasons. One, it involves strategy. Two, it's a way for your playmakers to get their hands on the football once again. And three, were you okay with the previous rule in which we saw touchbacks at a historic rate where we barely saw kickoffs? For me, this is now a kickoff in which the smart teams will win. The smart teams will find a way to make this beneficial and advantageous to set their offense up for really good field position. Because if you kick the ball out of the end zone or if you kick the ball out of bounds, there's a penalty here. So the kickoff team has to be precise with where they kick the football. And for the returning team, usually historically, you're like, unless it's a game on the line or a game that's close or a game of a large magnitude, we don't want to put Debo Samuel back there because you have free runners running full speed. They're going to hit him. Now that's not the case because the return team takes off once the returner fetches the football. So they're not going to have that momentum. What I would do if I'm the Niners, Debo, you've had down years in 2022, 2023 since signing that contract. You consider yourself a playmaker. You're one of the most elite playmakers of this modern era. Let's put you back there and let's find a way to block this up, to allow Debo to just impact the game in another area. Okay, Debo isn't going to return a couple of kicks. Then you have the sure-handed Trent Taylor. You have the speed burner and Danny Gray. Maybe that's an opportunity for him to make this roster because right now he might be on the outside looking in. Ronnie Bell had some punt return experience last year. He struggled, but that's another option. Ricky Pearsall can't find a way to get on the field. This is your way to show that you can use that footwork and that short area burst, the vertical leap and that acceleration, deceleration to find a way to impact the game. And I think that, at least I'm hopeful, that maybe the Niners are in a stage right now where they're trying to formulate a plan for which players they utilize for this new kick return. Because if they're going into this blind and they're like, we'll figure it out on the fly, they're going to be behind the eight ball here. They've been a smart organization. They've been a well-coached organization. To me, it comes down to this. It's simple. Find a way to put your best players back there and come up with some splash plays because you have all of those athletes at your disposal on this roster.
Yeah, I don't think you can just be like, hey, we're going to sit it out. I think you got to get in there and you got to compete.
Yeah.
You're always competing for dynamic players, dynamic plays. And to me, to sit this one out and just be like, we'll go with Trent Taylor and we just won't fumble. I think that's too short-sighted and not aggressive enough as far as seeking out the best result. George Kittle told us he was hurt for a good portion of the year last year. What do you think? Does that change your your impression of the year that Kittle had. And also it's like, who is tight end 2 on this team right now? I mean, is it going to be Mason Pline? I mean, he actually played a significant role in this minicamp. It's funny too, because I look at him as a receiver who needs work with his blocking. I've heard other people say he's a blocker who needs help with his receiving. I don't see it that way. I see him as a really good receiver with, maybe a little underpowered blocking wise. But is it Latu? Is it Willis? Is it Saubert? Is it going to be somebody from outside the organization? Who do you think is going to be tight end 2? And what do you think of the report that Kittle was, less than 100% from week 10 on or something like that?
Look, shout out to George Kittle playing through this injury. Not easy. And he kind of epitomizes what the Niners look for in players to be a part of their organization as a team captain, as a team leader. Always plays hard, always plays to the whistle. He's physical. He's got that confidence. He has that lively spirit. I think that's important inside a locker room to have a guy like this. And how about the career that he's putting together now? He was a second-team All-Pro in 2018. He was a first-team All-Pro in 2019. He got that contract. Then he was hurt. He was a Pro Bowler in 2021. And in the last year and a half, Larry, he's been the best tight end in the game. And I don't think it's particularly close because Travis Kelce slid last year. The back half of 2022 is when he came alive because Brock Purdy helped elevate his game to another level. He had 11 touchdowns, second-team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler. And last year, first 1,000-yard season since 2019, first-team All-Pro and a Pro Bowler, more than 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. And he's able to put up those numbers despite Christian McCaffrey having more than 2,000 all-purpose yards, Brandon Ayuk having a career year, and even in a down year, Deebo Samuel still able to have more than 1,000 all-purpose yards. So for him to put up that production with the injuries, I think it's really impressive. If he were on another team, he'd probably be utilized a little bit more. He's kind of on this borderline Hall of Fame track right now. So those are my thoughts on George Kittle and what he's been able to do last year and a half. He's been on fire, and I don't think that the prime years are dwindling just yet. As for the backup tight end, a little bit earlier, we're talking about moves that the Niners could make in free agency. Backup tight end is a problem. They tried to get Brock Wright from the Detroit Lions and sign him to that RFA tender or tag or whatever, and then the Lions matched that deal. They brought him back. Kyle Shanahan said after the draft, I really wish in hindsight we could have drafted a tight end. It didn't work out in our favor. So tight end 2 is a huge question mark. Cam Latu still hasn't practiced. He's still coming off the torn meniscus. And last year in the preseason and in training camp, you were there. He dropped every football pretty much that came his way. Braden Willis is a little bit shorter, kind of that H-back tight end type of player. Can he be a tight end 2? Eric Saubert, I don't see it there. Mason Pline has a good opportunity, and I know that you can shed some insight on Mason Pline. Does he realistically have a shot to be tight end 2? I'm not sure. Does he have a chance to make the 53-man roster? I think he could, but backup tight end, if Kittle goes down, that's not good, and I do think that played into the role, or the decision-making, I should say, in bringing back Javon Jennings. And I think maybe you see a philosophical shift from Shanahan. He looks at that Super Bowl tape. We couldn't beat press man. Let's spread it out a little bit more. Javon Jennings is not a tight end, but now you have a couple of slot guys that you could utilize out of the slot with Deebo and Ayuk being on the outside. You have that flexibility, but tight end behind George Kittle, I think, is a big problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, that to me is going to be, I'm eager to see, do they add another veteran guy? And if so, is it a blocker? Is it a receiver? Pline to me looks, the more I watch him move around, he reminds me a lot of Brent Jones. Mm-hmm. He's a little knock-kneed, and when you look at him standing there, you're like, that guy shouldn't be able to run, but he actually can run pretty well. But he kind of reminds me of Brent Jones, who was more of a receiver than a blocker, became a good, decent blocker. I think this guy's more of a receiver than a blocker. He's a bigger bodied guy than Brent. Brent was like 6'3", 6'4". This guy's more like 6'6", 6'7", but very similar. Understands where the soft spots are in the zone, better receiver than you think, smart as hell, doesn't make the same mistake twice. He's got a lot to learn, but he's really coming on. So, I mean, to me, Pline's interesting, but man, I mean, he's an undrafted free agent who didn't play a lot of college football. Do you make him tight end too?
Right.
Do you go out into the veteran market? I mean, it's going to be interesting. The other interesting thing is, with June 1st coming, there's still people that, the two guys offensively, I thought that really looked good in the minicamp was Pearsall and Cowing. Pearsall made a couple of really nice plays, but he just showed that ability to separate. And it's pretty clear that him and Brock are doing work together. And then Cowing is a guy who can separate vertically down the field. And, he ran like a deep cross and Purdy threw it to him and he went up in a crowd and caught it and brought it down. And it's just like, you're watching this guy and you're thinking, as much as Brock likes to attack down the field and loves the middle of the field and the kind of separation that Cowing typically is getting on these routes where he's running downfield, I could see Purdy to Cowing being a prolific situation. And a lot of rookie receivers don't produce at a high rate. I think this guy really could, just because he's got the trust of Brock and he's got good ball skills and he's got legit speed to separate. And Brock loves to take chances down the field.
People have raved about his toughness too, and people have raved about the toughness of Ricky Pearsall. He'll get hit, he'll pop right back up and isn't even fazed by that. And Jacob Cowing is an interesting player who height, weight, usage player reminds me a little bit of a Tyler Lockett, especially from a toughness standpoint too. Like he'll run that post and he's not a big target, doesn't have a big wingspan, but he's going to find a way to get the football. And that short area wiggle, the short area quickness, which gives you that ability to kind of win in the phone booth, the acceleration, deceleration, you're going to be matched up against some slower nickels, some linebackers. Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing could be matchup nightmares. And I think that went into the role, that went into the decision-making for San Francisco to draft those two players where they're like, man, you look back at that Super Bowl tape, we didn't have the press man beaters, but now with Cowing and Pearsall, you try to jam them at the line and you miss and they get by you. They slip to that second level and they're so smart and heady where they're going to find the soft spot in the zone. They're going to find that spot if they're playing man or beat man coverage. And it just gives you more offensive versatility, more offensive diversity. And these are players who have been very experienced at the college level. They've also put up a lot of production at the college level. And I don't think they're going to be phased. I get their pros type of takeaway from Pearsall and Cowing, where they're seasoned players who, again, have played a lot. And I think that experience does wonders. Look at how much the experience at college helped out Brock Purdy, making that seamless transition from Iowa State to the NFL level. So once the pads come on in training camp, and then even during mandatory minicamp next week, I'm excited to see both Cowing and Pearsall, their continued development. And once the bullets start flying, what do they look like within this offense? And can they sniff snaps right from the jump at a deep position?
Two last ones before we let you go. ESPN lists the Niners as the Super Bowl favorite. You think they should be? I mean, you got Kansas City, you got Detroit, Green Bay, Philly, Buffalo, Baltimore, Houston. There's some other really, really good teams in the NFL. And yet the Niners, I think they were like 16-1, but I think that was the favorite right now. Should the Niners be the favorite here as the calendar turns to June for Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans?
You and I talked about this last week. Kansas City Chiefs should be the favorite. They've won back-to-back Super Bowls. They have the best defense in the NFL. And now they have added Xavier Worthy, who's flashing cash on social media, as well as Marquise Hollywood Brown. And you add 2 4-2, 4-3 guys to that offense. Now we'll see what happens with Rashee Rice. Travis Kelce has to rebound, but in the playoffs, he came alive. Their offensive line, a solid unit. They've done a lot since losing that Super Bowl against Tampa Bay in making sure that the offensive line is better, because Mahomes in that Super Bowl loss to Tampa Bay was running for his life as the Buccaneers set the record for the most quarterback pressures generated in a Super Bowl. So I think that they, with Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, the aforementioned weapons defensively, they've won back-to-back championships. They should be the Super Bowl favorites. Should the Niners be up there? For sure. They still have one of the most talented rosters in the NFL. They're a couple of bad bounces and self-inflicted wounds away from celebrating their 6th Lombardi trophy in the history of the organization. but they haven't been able to get over the top. The one thing, Larry, that concerns me with the Niners, they've now made it to 4 NFC championship games in 5 years. They've made it to 3 straight NFC championship games and in the Super Bowl. They're a physical team. They've still been injured a lot. They found ways to escape the injury bug still be successful. But now they have the largest rest disadvantage since 1990. And they're coming off not only a physical season and seasons consecutively in which they've played a lot of football, but the rest is not on their side. They're starting to get a little bit older, but they're also coming off the human nature aspect of this. Can they recover mentally? Can they recover spiritually? Their hearts have been broken. Now, you can speak to the energy that you've seen at OTAs. I've heard that it's been pretty good. It's awesome to see Nick Bosa and Deebo Samuel at these voluntary practice sessions, but those are some of the concerns that I have with the Niners as far as being Super Bowl favorites and getting back there. They have the talent, but are they going to be able to escape the injury bug with a tough schedule too?
Let's finish with Purdy. It's funny. There was Emmanuel Sanders went on with Kay Adams, and he was saying, hey, I talked to Deebo, and Deebo said, hey, when Brock Purdy got in the huddle, he's all business, and he really takes control. There were, people talking about, Logan Ryan was talking about the Niner culture and how, normally there's 10 or 15 guys hanging out in a bye week in the weight room, and there was like 40 guys, and Purdy's in there, and he's working out, and Christian and Bosa and all these guys. And he just kind of spoke to the Niner culture, which is obviously they prepare hard. But then you had Chris Sims, who, God bless him. I thought he was a big Purdy fan, but, he was, I guess, a Lance guy. I don't know if he was a Lance guy or not, but he's obviously not a Purdy guy. He's got him ranked 17th.
Guy had Kellen Mond as his number 1 quarterback a few years ago. So.
Yeah, I mean, and I said, hey, I put out a tweet like, hey, this is Chris Sims' stats, and people are like, well, his stats, shouldn't matter. Well, no, you're right. 2 things can be equally true. He could have been a really bad NFL quarterback and a really bad analyst of current NFL quarterbacks. Right. He's not a bad analyst because he was a bad player, but he might be a bad analyst and a bad player. But either way, I went through the list and went through quarterbacks, and I've got Josh Allen and, Lamar and Burrow and, CJ Stroud, Mahomes, Herbert, Love, Stafford, maybe Rodgers, if you want to say lifetime achievement, maybe 1 or 2 others. But I mean, we're talking about, 7 or 8 names. That's probably where I'd put Purdy. Right about there, right? Somewhere he's not top 5, but he's between 5 and 10. And that's where I would rank him. He ranks him 17th. And I just think that's just so ridiculous. And then he went on to say that, he's a product of Kyle's system. We all know him and Kyle played at Texas together, so he's a big fan of Kyle. Okay, but I mean, everybody's a product of their system and their surroundings to some degree. And then he said, hey, his motion is just slow and elongated and lacks efficiency. And we're talking about a guy who's 17-4 in 21 starts in the NFL with great numbers. He's top 2 or 3 in almost every meaningful passing category. Where would you what did you think of Sims ranking him 17th? Is that just haterade right there? And where would you rank Purdy?
It's a joke. And these types of things are just done for clickbait and show recognition. It just doesn't make any sense to me. How in your right mind can you say, as a former quarterback, that Brock Purdy is 17th when, as a former quarterback, you should know that there are things that Brock Purdy does that make up for his lack of arm strength, his lack of build, him being small in stature. Also things that you should appreciate as a quarterback that make some of the great quarterbacks great. Brock Purdy's processing ability, being able to throw wide receivers open, being able to fit the ball into tight windows, being able to recognize the blitz, being able to process what defenses are doing and still provide splash plays. Him having the number 1 deep ball completion rate, despite his wide receiver separation being number 14. my coworker, Jack Sperry, is a great football analyst. He put together the top 10 most valuable NFL quarterbacks per pass attempt on third and long situations. Brock Purdy was third behind Kirk Cousins and Dak Prescott. So he does these things in these really important categories and areas which make him elite, and he elevates his other players, and he goes outside of the system and the scheme to do that. I get it. He has a great coach. He has really good playmakers. But this 49ers offense had the return of the deep ball last year, really for the first time under Shanahan with the Niners, had the deep ball as part of the offense. They had the number one overall offense in the NFL. You had all these players having career years. That is not, something that should be taken lightly. Brock Purdy helped make that happen. And visually, when you go from watching Jimmy Garoppolo to Brock Purdy, it was a completely different offense. So Brock Purdy, for me, I'm with you. He's probably in that 7 to 10 range of being, a top 10 quarterback in this league. And I'll tell you this, if he goes out there and he duplicates what he did in 2024 with what he did in 2023, you're going to be talking about him as a top 5 guy. Now, he doesn't do things at a special athletic level, like Patrick Mahomes or Justin Herbert or Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, right? But Tom Brady wasn't the greatest athlete. Joe Montana wasn't the greatest athlete. What they did, though, processing, touch, accuracy, feel, big-time player, that when you're staring in the face of adversity, how do you respond to that? Can you lead a comeback late? Can you win a clutch game? Can you put together a clutch drive? Brock Purdy's been able to do all of this. So I just don't see how you can rank him 17th in the NFL. That's middle of the pack. That's worse than middle of the pack. 32 starters in the NFL.
Yeah. And is your read on that this guy's just not a very good analyst? Or because a lot of times people will say, well, if it's coming from Sims, it's coming from Shanahan. And some people have suggested that maybe Shanahan's, trying to utilize Sims to get a better contractual environment, let's say, when they go to extend Purdy, because there's people talking down about him. Or is it possible that maybe Kyle's not as big a fan of Purdy as we think, and he's being honest in his dialogue with Sims, and Sims is just kind of regurgitating that in a public forum? Is it what's your read on that? Do you think Kyle is losing enthusiasm for Purdy? Do you think it's about getting a better price on the contract? Otherwise, or is Sims just not a very good evaluator?
Look, Chris Sims had Kellen Mond as his number one quarterback, and now Kellen Mond can't even crack a roster or get playing time, and he stinks, right?
Right.
And I know that Sims and Shanahan are very tight, but it just goes against everything that Kyle Shanahan has said. And how could Kyle Shanahan say that when Brock Purdy's gone out there and has made it to 2 straight NFC championship games, could have been back-to-back Super Bowls if he didn't rip open his elbow, and has gone 17-4 and has put up great efficiency numbers. He's been a perfect fit for what Kyle Shanahan wants in a quarterback. He's run his system masterfully, and he's helped elevate the playmakers. So I think this is just a off-base opinion by Chris Sims to try to get some off-season engagement. I don't think that this is coming from Kyle, because Kyle even said, after the first couple of practices, I looked at Jed York and said, he might be our number one quarterback. Maybe not now, but at some point down the road. And he's been overly complimentary of Brock. Could it be a negotiating tactic to drive that price down? Yeah, it could be. But again, if Purdy goes out and he slings the pill and he balls out in 2024, I don't care what happens. You're going to have to give him the Brinks truck.